Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with introduction. So, aloha ahi ahi kako. Good evening. Welcome to our first virtual Kahaukani conversation of 2021. We made it out of 2020, guys. Yay! Pat yourselves on the back. For those who are new to our programs, we are Mānoa Heritage Center. We're a 3.5 living classroom and established to promote the understanding of the natural and cultural heritage of Hawaii by caring for and sharing a cultural landscape centered around the Wahipana, Kuka'o'o, a heiau that sits here on the Cook family property. We're kind of nestled in the middle of Mānoa here. And so from atop Kuka'o'o, we can actually see the Chinese cemetery. Tonight's event is founded and funded by the Atherton Family Foundation, G. and Wilcox Trust, Island Insurance, and Malama Manoa. This program is named after the beloved partner of the Tuahine rain, Kahaukani, a breeze that is said to cause the hau grove to rub, sending a creaking noise throughout the valley. Like how Kahaukani carries the sound of the hau, these lectures carry ike, knowledge, from Mānoa to your sanctuary, your home. This lecture will be about 45 minutes to an hour, and then again, we'll have a 15-minute period of Q&As after, and you can connect with our speaker, Nanette. And now I'll introduce our speaker. So Nanette Naomi Napoleon, the beautiful face right next to me, this way, is a freelance researcher, writer, and lecturer who focuses on the history and cultures of Hawaii. She is best known as being the state's leading expert on historic cemeteries and is the author of the book Oahu Cemetery Burial Ground and Historic Site. Nanette has been featured in numerous newspaper and magazine articles and television news stories. In 2020, she received a prestigious Individual Achievement Award from the Historic Hawaii Foundation for her 35 years of research, educational outreach, and legislative advocacy regarding historic cemetery sites. Tonight's lecture, Mānoa Chinese Cemetery, Legacy of a Valley, will include an introductory history of this site and its role as a prominent geographical and cultural feature of Mānoa Valley, followed by specific preservation issues regarding compromised headstones. Nanette, we are so grateful for your passion to shine light on our kupuna and this prominent ancestral feature of Mānoa. With the smiles of our loved ones gleaming down upon us, I'm pleased to welcome Nanette Napoleon.
Yay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know there's a lot of you out there, which is very exciting, and I hope to hear Q&A from you. So the reason you're seeing this title on the screen is because I put this PowerPoint together specifically for Mid-Pacific Institute, where a teacher there named Billy Napoleon, with whom I'm related, teaches a class in historic preservation. So she asked me, she's assigned projects for her students to about preservation in Mānoa Valley, where the school is located. So that's why the title is here, and I want to give credit to them for inspiring, pushing me to do this show with this PowerPoint, which you're going to see now. So let's get started. My talk is in two sections. The first half will be talking about the valley in general and putting the cemetery into context. It doesn't exist alone by itself out there in the middle of a desert. It's in a valley, and so I'm going to talk about the history of it, and then the second half will be the preservation part. So I know a lot of you that are participating actually live in the valley, so you're familiar with one of the main landmarks, physical landmarks in the valley, is a kakano, which is over here to the left of the screen, and it's shaped like a pyramid in the picture. But that's where the cemetery is located. Here's a picture. Oh wait, I gotta go back. So Akaka Knoll, the name Akaka comes from the Akaka family who lived in the valley for many generations. And there's an Akaka street. Is it street or place next door? Over here going along over here, back there now. So, but a lot of people know the street, Akaka Street, but don't know that that this other physical landmark is called Akaka Knoll. Here's an aerial view, a modern day aerial view of the cemetery. You can see that it has two entry roads, one here on the right, and then another one that loops around here. And the entrance is, you can enter here or here. And then we have a feature here. The red marks are the kind of featured areas I'm going to go and show you. So let's start with this one at the bottom. Now, before we go there, look at Mānoa Valley and think about it in terms of being an amphitheater. It's located in what's called an amphitheater. So it's enclosed on three sides with one open side towards the mountain, towards the ocean rather. Here's the entrance to the cemetery. This feature here is called a gate. This isn't the original gate that was there. Some of you are old enough to remember that the original gate was a much smaller wooden gate that had the two upper right pieces and one piece going across the top, but was much smaller and made out of wood. But it lasted a long time. But back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the cemetery started saying they wanted to upgrade the cemetery, and they did a lot of fundraising over a number of years, and they were able to replace the old red gate by this more modern, more elaborate, and more beautiful entry gate. Now you'll notice some features on the side. So Mānoa Chinese Cemetery is the popular name to call the site, but the real name is Lin Yi Chung Cemetery, Lin Yi Chung. Here's a couple of features that are near the entrance there. There are two lions, and the lion is a very important cultural symbol in Chinese culture. And they were dedicated to two different groups. One is dedicated by the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and the other one by the United Chinese Society of Hawaii. So these lions act as protectorates of the souls that rest there. Also, a feature at the front, close to the entrance, is this terracotta figure, which was not installed till more recent times, not that many years ago, less than 10 years ago. And it's a replica of China's first emperor. And I won't even try to pronounce his name, but China's first emperor. I know some of you, or if not most of you, have heard of the Chinese terracotta statues in China, because it's become a famous story in world history. But it's a beautiful, this one is a reproduction, a replica rather. Here's a close-up of the replica with some koa tree in the background and tea in the front. And here's a close-up of the engraving on the marker. I won't read it all, but he was the first emperor of China. And his accomplishments include building the Great Wall of China and commissioning the creation of 7,000 terracotta warriors. He also standardized the written language, currency, weights, and measures. So this was a gift to Mānoa Chinese Cemetery, this plaque and the terracotta replica by a number of different local groups and some a group from Taipei. Here's a picture of the Terracotta excavation site in China. Close up, some close-ups. So in the original excavation, they've so far to date have come up with 8,000 soldiers, 670 horses, and 130 chariots. So here's another picture of the valley on the left-hand Emma side. And again, see how the mountains kind of curve around to the left, and then they curve around to the right, creating that amphitheater structure. So look at the red circle. We're going to go up the hill. It's on a hill. All Chinese cemeteries, or most of them, almost all of them that I've seen, are on hillsides. And that's an important cultural feature, so that the ancestors who dwell in the afterworld in the cemetery are looking down upon the community below and watching for what the people, the live people are doing. So then we're going to go up to the top of this knoll to see the feature up there called the Grand Ancestor Tomb. Here's a little bit closer up the site. The platform has always been there, but it's been repainted and redecorated. Again, they used to have a red gate-like feature here, and that's been changed out. When they changed out the front gate, they put in a new gate up here as well. So it's a big platform here. I'll show you some images of that close up. There's a stairs going up the front, and some dragons at the top, and a sign. There's several historic signs around the site, and the #1 sign is Grand Ancestor's Tomb, otherwise known as the Tai Chu. Here's a close-up of the gate up there. Beautiful, beautiful work. You know, I must say, when I first started hanging out in that cemetery back in the 1980s, it doesn't look as anywhere close to as beautiful as it does today. And I know a lot of you who've visited the cemetery, you've gone by it in your neighborhood, you know this, because it used to be really overgrown and a lot of crumbling things and not painting things properly, keeping up, simply because they didn't have enough money. But it was through the largely through the guidance of a president that came on in more modern times, George, who started a campaign on fundraising and brought up together some Chinese societies to help remedy that. And they actually took out, this is not the original altar, but it's the replacement altar. I'll show you the original altar in a minute. But the new one is more grand and has lots more information on it. And I hope that all of you watching, if you live on the island anyway, will take some time to go up there and look around and read all this information on there. There's a lot of history about the cemetery and why it was founded and all that. Here's a picture from standing on the altar platform, looking down Mauka to the ocean. And that's an important cultural feature, that it be on a hillside. And the second qualification for a good site is that it be facing a body of water. So in this case, Linicheng is facing the ocean, the south shore of the island of Oahu. Here's another more panoramic view of the valley and the commanding presence of Akaka Knoll and the cemetery. Here's if you're at the top, here's the right-hand side of the knoll. And this area here is the older section, and almost all of the markers in here are made out of concrete. So the earliest settlers that came, they came from different provinces in China. They had different affiliations. But when they came here, like all immigrant groups who came here, and immigrant groups that, you know, you go to a foreign country, you find your others that are from where you're at, and you form some kind of association. So these are the people that, the earliest settlers to the islands, and they didn't have much money in those days, so they couldn't afford marble and granite markers. So they went with cement markers for the large part. And I'll show you some close-ups of those, which are also the most vulnerable. Here's a more ground view of that right-hand side of the Eva side of the cemetery. And I'm going to show you a close-up of this building, which is called the Bone House. I'll show you that in a minute. And then you can notice here, the part, there's towards the back of the cemetery, there's the older cement ones, but closer to the front, it's more modern and more marble and granite markers. So here's from down below looking back on the right-hand side. That's be the Eva side you see of the mountain, and then it swings around to the left. And here's a mixed bag of both concrete markers here, and then marble and granite markers also. Here's looking at the Eva side, upper Eva side, and you can see already that almost all of a lot of them are just concrete ones, but then we have some granite, not granite, but granite markers down here. But these being so narrow and so thin, and being on a hillside, it all puts them all in jeopardy of falling over. So you see them tilted over. So that's a preservation issue. That's there's a lot of these. Sadly, and unfortunately, the cemetery has not had the wherewithal. That, you know, they've been really good at raising money to mow the lawn and keep the place looking really, really beautiful now. But you know, it's hard to raise money to do the actual field work and fix tombstones. It's a very can get very expensive. So, but hopefully, maybe one day they'll be able to do it in parts. You know, raise money and do this section, raise money, do some other preservation work, restoration work. I'm going to go back over there in a minute, but I wanted to talk about Qingming since we were at the top at the Ancestor tomb. Every day on April 5th, the Lin Yicheng Chinese Association sponsors a memorial service up there for all the ancestors buried in the cemetery. And so they put a canopy up on the top, on the platform, and then they have chairs for dignitaries, and a lot of people from the various different Chinese organizations come, and people from the city and county of Honolulu and other political figures, they come to help this program. So this is Douglas Chung. He's works for the cemetery, and he's reading introductions and talking about Qingming, which they do every year. And the public is welcome to go to Qingming on April 5th. It usually starts at 10 o'clock. And so I try to go every year and take a group, but this year I couldn't because of the pandemic. But I really encourage you to do that. And maybe next year through Manoa Heritage Center, we could take you guys over there if they're doing it. So here's a close-up of what the things that they put on the altar, and it's prescribed things. It's things that you have to have at the altar. But it changes from region to region in China, but kind of basically is the same. You light candles here and burn incense, but you have to be careful to make sure you get the right kind of Chinese candles and Chinese incense, because the Japanese do the same thing, but they have different kinds of candles and different kinds of incense. So to get the Chinese ones, you got to go to Chinatown, and a lot of the shops sell these things. And then you have to have certain foods laid out on the altar, and they have a lot of food that's at the Ancestor tomb. But you do that at the individual grave sites as well. Here's showing some of the dignitaries attending the event a couple of years ago. You have the honor guard here. Oh, wait. In years past, I've seen everything from colored, not doves, but pigeons, homing pigeons. They release cages and the homing pigeons fly around the cemetery, and then they go back to wherever they came from. They haven't done that in a couple of years. And before, they used to have a plumeria drop from a helicopter with bags of plumeria, and they come over the altar and they drop all the flowers down on us. That was really cool, but they had to cut that one because of expenses too. So at different points, they've gone all out on this thing. So in the back of the main part of the altar, that big part, is a smaller monument. It's called, dedicated to the Sovereign Earth Mother, the Sovereign Earth Mother. This is one small white one. It was the original Sovereign Earth monument, but they've changed it to the one on the right. Can you see the one on the right? More elaborate, more expensive, more detailed. But the thing is, they kind of hid this original one in the back. I kind of wish they would have kept them up side by side, because, you know, in preservation, we don't tear down something. This is unique, the original one, and it's kind of a violation to tear something like this. I don't think they actually tore it down. They just put this one, the newer one, in front of the old one. I wish they had kept them side by side. But they're both very historic, very cultural, very important. And then all the way up at the road, top above the altar, is a turnaround area, and in the turnaround area is this beautiful statue, and it's in memory of Mr. Shou Chi Wang. It's actually a marker, a tombstone, and a beautiful feature in the cemetery. Here's the bone house I was telling you about, which is down below. It's a, nondescript concrete tile a structure, but they only open the doors on Qingming Day, they open it up on the day of Qingming, but they'll open it up if you have ancestors in there and you want to visit. So the only time you can actually, the general public can see inside there is on Qingming Day, which I really encourage you to go look at. So lions, again, lions are a prominent cultural feature in icon in Chinese culture. So in Chinese culture, when somebody dies, you're usually, if you're in China, you're taken and you're buried in in a close by village cemetery. There's no need for a bone house. But if you are like the immigrants who came from China and settled in the United States, they didn't have a family visit. Their obligation was really to get their relative back to China so they could be buried in China. But in the early days, they couldn't afford to pay passage you have to have a male companion take the ashes back to China. And sometimes two would go two people. So they couldn't afford to send even one person to China. So they started building these bone houses in Hawaii. And that all the bone houses have, or most of them that I've seen anyway, have these shelves inside, and all different manner of containers were used to put the ancestors' bones. So somebody would die, they'd bury them initially, and then after 7 years, which is a good luck, you disinter the body, you have it cremated, and then you put it in some kind of container and you put it in the bone house until you could raise enough money to send the ashes back to China. But a lot of people never were able to earn that much money and get that much money to do that. So they still remain in the bone houses today. Leather, some of the containers they have in there are these metal boxes. Some of them were ammunition boxes. This is our porcelain jars that were sent to the islands with food in them, and then a seal on the top. So it would go to the merchant shop in Chinatown, they take out the food, and they would repurpose the jars, or sometimes they would put them in the alley, and other people of different races would come and get the jars out of the rubbish and take it home. And I know my family talks about making poi in these kind of containers. The Germans would make sauerkraut. The Portuguese would make pickled onions. The Germans would put sauerkraut in these jars. So a lot of families got these jars, but then a lot of families use them for putting their family ashes in. Here's an ammunition box. Here's just a plain a box that had Encyclopedia Britannica things in them, but was repurposed for ashes. So here we are again back in the preservation department. Here's a more close-up view of how much the markers are tilted. Now you see what we can see above ground is the upright piece, but below the ground there's usually a base that the upright is put into, a cement base like this. But sometimes they either break off of that base or there's not a base and it's just in the ground without a base, which makes it more vulnerable for tipping, especially on a hillside. So over the years, a lot of them have tilted, not only downhill, but some of them even have tilted back uphill. You see that? Most of them are going down, but then we have some that are tilted backwards. Here's one that's toppled all the way over. And, I'm not sure what this piece is, but this is the upright, which should be upright. And I've never been able to determine where the puka is that it's supposed to go back in. I've not dug around in there, but here's one that's completely tipped over. Or actually, I think if you tilted it up from here and pushed it up, it might go in a slot. It might go in a slot right here on top of this. I'm not sure. This is the grave in that tilty area, and I'll show you the close-up of it. It's an important historic associations. This is a grave of Patrick Kahamokupuni Chong Awing. Patrick Kahamokupuni Awing Chong. Okay. He was born on April 17th, 1911, and he died on December 7th, 1941. What happened on December 7th, 1941? I know you all know this. You can't tell me, shout it out to me, but it's Pearl Harbor. The attack on the island of Oahu, particularly at Pearl Harbor. So the story is that this man, Patrick, was a young man at the time, and he had a girlfriend and a daughter. His daughter was Eunice Wilson. She also died on December 7th, 1941. And when another separate historic project I've been doing collecting research on for decades now also is the civilians who died on December 7th, 1941. So Patrick and Eunice were two of the civilians who died in near the corner of School Street and Pully Highway. There was a housing area over there, and Patrick was actually not living, they weren't living together at the time, but he came to the house of his wife and child, and when he was in the front yard, about ready to go, and Eunice, the mother of Eunice, was on the porch, and an anti-aircraft shell came from the bombings and struck right in front of the house where they were and killed Patrick and his daughter and injured the mother. She lost her arm in that. So this is an historic event that happened to this person. Now comes some issues with what people have been doing recently, which I'm not real happy with, is that they're painting over concrete markers. Like this one on the left, they've repainted it entirely in red in the background and yellow in the inscription area. It makes it look pretty like that, and you can read it better, definitely. But the problem with paint is on anything outside, especially in such a wet area as Mānoa, is that this is what happens to the markers, the one you see on the right. The paint eventually deteriorates, and then there's more ruin to the marker. So now that that's happened to this one on the right, that the paint has gone, and then there's other issues with different kind of bacteria building up on it and everything. It's sort of like kind of worse than what it was before they started. So it's been a big challenge to clean that thing right now and restore it. So restoration rule number 1, do no harm. I think painting markers is doing some harm to the markers. And I don't want to put down anybody, I'm not putting down people, but just to make you aware of these things, that it's not a good idea to paint a marker. And you can see that the marble and granite markers that you see in the back there's no signs of that much damage to the markers because they are more solid stone, marble and granite. But concrete has all kinds of issues can happen to concrete because it's more brittle, they can break easier, they're more subject to deterioration because of bacteria and the rain and all kinds of things. And then you see this lots of little cracks that come up on them like that over the years. When they get older and older, there's more this natural cracking that comes along with it. And it's really difficult. You can't fix this pretty much once it gets to that bad. I've spent many years going to cemetery researcher conferences on the mainland, where we always have every year preservation sessions. So a lot of what I learned how to preserve markers comes from those conferences. Here's another example of painting of markers. Now these paintings have only come within the last 6 months or so. This was reported to me by somebody called me up and said, "Hey, Nanette, did you know that there's somebody's vandalizing the cemeteries? They're painting it in red paint." And then I went, "Whoa, what's happening?" And I rushed down there and took these pictures. And then I talked to Robert, who was the superintendent over there, and he says, "Oh, no, it's not vandalism. It's, I'll show you close-up of these. And they look similar, right? what the inscription is about. And it turns out that's because, and here's showing one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here. For up until all the years that I've been going there since the 1980s, I've only seen one like that. And then all of a sudden, all of these other ones pop up. So I was going, whoa, what the heck is going on? But it turns out that these were put in by members of the Kahaukani Society, post number 11, a military veterans society of Chinese guys who served in World War II. And so they put Kahaukani Society, and then that's their mark, I guess, here, post number 11. So they could see, you know, find their members quickly, I guess, when they were going around. I don't know, because I've been trying to get a hold of somebody from Kahaukani Society, but I haven't talked to them directly. Here's a picture of a granite marker, nice, like pretty much conserved, except for these would be rain. When rain comes and goes down the face of the grave, it creates some damage, but not so much as here on concrete markers. So this, you can read this one pretty clear, but not this one. Again, showing the difference between a strong, dense granite marker and a concrete marker. And then there's a lot, quite a few of the dragons around which we've seen. And so here's what I'm calling stage one in some deterioration. So this one was installed out in the front in more recent times, and there hasn't been much deterioration in the deeper crevices of the hair of the lion. There's some buildup over here now because water tends to pool in these areas, and in the mouth, water pools there, but you don't see much on the top because it gets more sun, and the water, any rain can get off the monument quicker, and it doesn't leave behind residue. But then in stage two, it's much worse, but still not that totally that bad. But then here's phase three. This is all three different lions, and this one's a goner. I thought maybe I would go in there and try to fix it, try to clean it up at least. I don't think I can get it all cleaned up, but it's still on my list to go back there and clean as much of this off as I can. So if anybody wants to go with me and volunteer and help with me to help clean that off, you know how to get in contact with me. But you'll notice the completely different degradation going on here as time goes on. That's why it's important for families to keep up their grave markers. But what happens when the line goes away, the families move away, the younger generations aren't interested anymore, and they don't take the time to go. Well, this is what happens, degradation over the decades. And that's back to the entrance, and we're back to we're going to go to Q&A.
Hey, mahalo, Nanette, for all that very interesting information and beautiful images, especially if you have never been to the cemetery before.
Right.
Thank you. As you were talking, we actually got quite a bit of questions, so we'll get right into that.
Okay.
Connecting to your last topic, we have a couple questions. One question is, you said that those are lions, but somebody asked, are they a lion or dragon?
Or dragons. They could be dragons. And yeah, there's some people call them lions, some people call them dragons. And there's a distinction, but it's not that great. So the average person looks at them more as lions.
Okay, thank you. And then another question along the same line is, are these lions and or dragons, also known as foo dogs.
Yes. Yes. So that's another term, foo dogs, but they're usually smaller. The foo dogs. Yeah. But they look similar.
Oh, okay. And then you kind of mentioned this, but somebody asked if it's possible to have volunteers to help do headstone repair under skilled supervision. I know you mentioned that for the statues to clean them, you could use volunteer help, but what about headstone repair?
Headstone repair. I've led different groups in fixing stones all around the island, all around this island. The problem is, one, we have to raise a certain, not a, depends on how much work you want to do, but you have to raise funds to buy supplies, the fixing supplies. There's specific tools and things I have to buy to do the work. And in the case of really heavy markers, you have to have actually a pulley system to upright them because it's too heavy for the normal persons to lift them up. I don't think we need a tripod system in this cemetery because they're fairly small, but we can certainly try. But the cemetery would need to, or some other organization would need to raise funds to pay for the equipment and whatnot that I need, the supplies that I would need to bring to do the work.
Okay. And if that was to ever happen, Nanette, I'm sure you would reach out to Mānoa Heritage Center, and we would then reach out to all of our constituents, and especially those who came today.
Right.
But and, the cleaning one, can we?
The cleaning one's easy. It has some cost. I guess to get special. You can't just clean with Clorox or soap from home. I have to have specialized stuff, but it's not really expensive to get the cleaning material. So that's the easier thing to do. We could start with that, have a session doing that, and then another thing do the uprighting. But of course, you'd have to work with the cemetery, get permission from Robert and the board to actually do that kind of work. And right. I probably need to get permission from Robert as well to do the cleaning part as well.
So for those who are interested to help to clean and do the more simpler, service learning, email us, and then we'll connect you to Nanette, and it'll happen when it happens from there. Okay. How are concrete markers engraved?
Well, back in the days, these older ones, by hand, by chisel and hammer. But the modern ones on most of these, well, some of these older marble and granite ones are chisel and hammer, but in more modern times, as the markers get more new, they're done by drills. No, I should say, take that back. The technique is you draw a picture. It comes in stages. You have a picture of what you want to do, and then you have like a rubber mat, like a 1/4-inch rubber mat, and you cut out the image from that, what your thing might look like, your inscription. You put that on the marker, a flat, untouched marker, and then you get not a power washer, sort of like a power washer, but what you're pushing out sand, and then the sand goes onto the mat, and it carves out where the carved out areas on that mat, and then you take it off and you have an inscription.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I'm going to jump up to a very early question from the beginning when you first started. This is kind of complicated, but I'll do my best. So the October 12th, 2020 Honolulu Star Advertiser news had a photo titled Standing Guard. And the caption reads, The hillside property is the former location of the summer home of King Kamehameha I and Queen Ka'ahumanu. Do you know if this is correct?
Yeah, in fact, you had, what's his name, come and talk about it, the archaeologist.
Pat Kirch?
Yeah, Pat Kirch.
All right, there you go. See?
I was at that lecture.
Experts listening to experts. It's awesome. So yes, and then if you want to maybe hear a little bit more about that, that lecture is on our website and or on YouTube. So Mr. Fink, you can go and get more details with that there. Okay, so and then from the same person, the first sentence of the caption reads, "A statue of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, stands at the entrance of the cemetery in Mānoa. The statue was a gift from the Taipei Economic Cultural Office of Honolulu." Oh, I guess that was a comment more so. Okay.
But I answered that.
Okay. And then came a question, a very basic question. When was the cemetery established and what is the oldest headstone?
It was established in the 1860s, but I don't know the oldest grave in there. You know, back in the 80s, I spent almost 3 years documenting graveyards on Hawaii, on the island, and I had grant money and whatnot. But I didn't have enough grant money to go into Chinese and Japanese cemeteries and hire a translator to translate ones in Chinese and kanji. So it's not in my work that I did. I surveyed 76 cemeteries or something. So unfortunately, what was the question?
What is the oldest headstone?
Oh, the oldest headstone. So I don't know the oldest headstones because there's no actual a really good list that you can go to get that. And Robert has some knowledge of that. You have to go ask Robert about that, the superintendent.
Okay. Another question referring to the headstones. Do people come to make rubbings of the markers? Like put on a piece of paper or put a paper over the marker and run a pencil or charcoal over it. Does this damage the marker?
It doesn't damage the marker as long as you do it the right way. And there is a technique, the one that I've learned from the conferences and all of that. I prefer different people use different things to cover the marker. But the most important thing is to cover the entire marker and not have any space where you would rub onto the marker itself. You only want to rub on the paper. So I could give a class just on that. I've done it a lot more for children. Small children like to do that kind of thing. And when I have school groups, I sometimes, if there's enough time, we go and we do rubbings that they can take home. So it's not hard. And you have to have this. I use crayons. Other people use different things to actually do the rub, or charcoal. Charcoal's one, but that gets too messy. I like the crayon. It's a little easier for me, but people use different things and they can come out really, really beautiful. And a lot of people do them and then frame them as art.
Cool. So that could be another future class. And or we can make a fun video.
Yeah.
Okay. So from Suzanne, the stage 3 degradation, about how old is that?
Oh, that's decades old.
Got it.
I would say by that time it's at least 40, 50 years old, if not older. It takes a while to get to that stage, but so because I know markers in that area I know about how old they are, so I'm guessing that one's 30, 40 years old.
Okay. Awesome. And this is a little personal question. How did you come by your fascination with cemeterial history and art?
Oh, I got interested in it when I was in college. I I graduated from Manoa, and I spent 2 years, my last 2 years there. But my first 2 years, I went to a small little college on Maui called Mauna Olu College. Hardly anybody's ever heard of it, and it's not there anymore. But when I was at Mauna Olu, some friends of mine, we went on a backpacking trip to Kaupo, and we ended up camping near an old Hawaiian cemetery. And we started talking about cemeteries, and we're 18, 19, 20 years old in there. And at night we're camping and we're going, oh, and we sing the cemetery and we're talking about death and dying. And, oh, what is the meaning of death and dying? And why do we have cemeteries and all these existential topics? And then ever since we had that discussion, cemeteries became on my radar kind of thing. And as I went about my life, wherever I was going on Maui, and then when I came home to Oahu, I would notice all of a sudden where cemeteries were. Oh, there's another cemetery. Oh, I passed by here all the time. I never thought about this before. So then I just started hanging out and stopping and hanging out in old graveyards all over the place. And I was taking photography classes at Mauna Olu, and I had a camera, and I would go around taking pictures. So at an early age, I was really into taking pictures of old graveyards. Aesthetically, they really appealed to me. They were like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here, and they're beautiful, and the lighting at certain times was just an aesthetic experience for me. And I've always carried that with me. And I'm still today, I'm out there always taking pictures of graveyards, and I love taking pictures of graveyards. That could be another class. Class on how to photograph markers, and especially for genealogy purposes, to get the right lighting so you can get the inscription in a photo is a learned thing. There's special techniques I've learned over the years how to get the best photo you can get. That could be another class.
That's amazing. We will let you viewer, your attendees know if and when these classes come up.
Yeah.
Mahalo. Okay, we got quite a bit of more questions. Let me ask this one. Is there a significance of the red tea leaf?
Well, red in Chinese is very cultural, and it's important. It means good luck, and it means lots of things, long life. And so red in general in Chinese culture is very important color. So that's why red gate, red, this one even has a small section with red in it. And so they could have put, there are some green tea leaves in this cemetery, but 99% of them are red tea, red Chinese color. And it's beautiful. The landscaping there is way better than what it was 20 years ago. It's really a beautiful, beautiful site.
And it really stands out, especially from up on top Kuka'o'o. We can really see it because of the red tea leaf. Yeah. And then is this still an active cemetery?
Yes, but not in this section. 10 years ago or so, they bought some property that's not here, that you can't see anywhere here. You have to go up a Kako street and then turn off, and then they've opened a newer section, and it looks like more like Diamond Head Cemetery or something. It's more modern.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so sorry, going back to an earlier question. So there seems to be confusion in terms of the protocols of upkeep. Markers are tilted, and it is deemed the responsibility of the cemetery. Yet people come in and paint the markers in red paint as though they belong to them. Where is the line drawn?
Okay, that's a sensitive question in this case, because I have the same question and I talked to Robert about this, that did they get permission to do this from Robert to do that? I don't know. And he was a little bit vague about that, but, and I don't want to get into it, but you should, if it's your own marker, okay, your family marker, and you have proof to do it, you can't just, even if you have proof, most cemeteries have rules, what are called rules and regulations that you can do. Yes, it's your plot. Yes, it's your stone, but you can't do certain things. So you have to go to the office and find out what their rules and regulations are as far as planting plants next to the marker, not painting the marker, and to get best practices advice on what to use and what not to use. But unfortunately, a lot of the old cemeteries, they don't even have people managing the cemetery. And so people are just go and do whatever they want, which is hard for me to see because they don't do things, they're not trained and know how to do things correctly using paint or whatever. But it is what it is. But if you have a cemetery, more modern cemetery, and there's an office where you can ask the people, ask them, what am I allowed to do in my plot?
And I know the the Manoa Chinese Cemetery, there isn't an active office, but there is a website and there is a group in charge, the Lin
Chung Chinese Association. Yep.
Yeah. So I know they have a web. Yeah.
But the protocol is to go through Robert. He's the superintendent, and then he goes to the board.
Okay. So if anyone wants more information on that, send us an email. We'll connect you with Nanette and Robert. Okay. It is 6 o'clock, but since we have some more questions, I think we'll just go over just a little bit. If you're interested, then just stay with us. This question is, what is the story about the children's cemetery? Is it part of the epidemics?
The children's section?
Yes.
Yes, there is a children's section. Close. See where the gate is right now? To the right of here, there's a children's section. And that's typical of almost a lot of cemeteries in Hawaii. It's not particularly a Chinese thing, but there are a lot of children in that section. Then not necessarily, when I go into a children's section, I always look at the dates, and sometimes it could be because of an epidemic or something like that. But when I look into that cemetery, there's different dates from different times of the children. So it's not necessarily part of it could have been, I was thinking, are there 1918, 1919 flu epidemic people in there, victims in there, children, or any place else in the cemetery. And that's another story I've been following, and I've been to many grave sites looking for victims of the 1918, 1919 flu epidemic. In Oahu Cemetery, where I do a lot of tours, there's a kind of a big section where there's more than a dozen people who died in the epidemic, the flu epidemic, that are buried in one section. So that's something to look for when you're looking at graveyards. You're just, visiting and you're looking around. Look at the dates, and you can associate them with Pearl Harbor, with the flu epidemic, with other historical events in history, in Hawaiian history and in national history.
Interesting. Research at the cemetery.
Yeah.
Thank you. So a question from Philip Dieters. What are the other buildings associated with the cemetery? So besides the bone house that you mentioned.
Yeah. So there's another a structure on the property that looks like a house, kind of. They used to call it the pavilion, and they used to have a school there, like a Montessori school, and then it converted, and then they moved that to across the street. Oh, they have the other building across the street from the cemetery that they use as a community hall, but that's not on this ground. It's down the street and off to the side. So The building that's there now next to the bone house it's a family. You know, it's changed so much over the years. I'm not sure right now who's in there, but they had like a ballet school in there once, and they had some artisans in there once, and some other people. And I'm not sure what's in there now. I should find out from Robert. But it's still, the building's still there.
Okay. Thank you. Going back to dragons, what are the dragon and lions made of?
Marble and marble. The white ones are usually marble. I don't think, well, this cemetery there's any lions or dragons made of granite. Marble, the white ones are always usually marble, and the darker ones are granite. Marble is a softer stone, and it deteriorates faster than the granite darker stones.
Awesome. Would Allison asked, would you happen to know where the watchful dragon of Mānoa is?
The watchful dragon of Mānoa. Well, okay, wait. I don't know if this is the right answer to that. I've not heard that term before, the watchful dragon, but I failed to say in the beginning part, when this site, Mānoa Valley, was picked for the site, the group that was starting the cemetery, they sent off to China to bring over a special guy who was called in English geomancer, a person specially trained into selecting auspicious sites to build houses or to build cemeteries or any other structures. So you had to, was a specialist in this area. And I can't think of the name right off the top of my head, the term for that. But anyway, the person came and he was led around the island to observe and see where's the most best place with, according to the sun and the moon and the stars and the landscape, where's the best place to put a cemetery. So he, on horseback, rode up into the valley, and from down below, they say from where the Salvation Army places now, the restaurant and things, he was over there and he was looking up in the valley. He saw a kakano. He didn't know it was called that back then, or it wasn't even called that back then exactly, but he looked up there and in his mind, he saw the tail of a dragon coming down. It was a dragon with a tail sweeping down like this. And he said, aha, that's the tail of a dragon. You need to put your cemetery over there. So maybe that's a reference to that.
Fun. Okay, I just want to let everybody who's still with us know that, we have a bunch of more questions. And, sorry if we don't get to your question, but if you really want it to be answered, then I would ask that question in the chat box and mark it with your email, so we can email you a response in case we don't get to that question. Okay, there's a comment from Sandra Sukiyama, backtracking to the building next to the bone house, that the house next to the bone house holds classes for La'au Lapa'au and Hawaiian culture. So
Okay.
It's an actively used building. And I believe that one is the Living Life Source Foundation, run by Uncle Bruce Keaulani, them. So, you know how you just mentioned that story of the dragon? So somebody asked, and I feel like this is connected, can you talk about the significance of Feng Shui and the Mānoa Chinese
Oh, that's
cemetery?
the word I was looking for, Feng Shui.
Yeah.
That's the art of determining where an auspicious site is, where you should build a house or a cemetery or whatever else. Feng Shui. Yeah.
Awesome. Got Hawaii, yes, there will be future virtual classes. None is aligned just yet, but because we have your email, you will get a notice whenever our next session pops up. And we're planning for a one next month, but again, to be determined. Okay, I'm gonna pop back to the Q&A box, and we'll just keep going. Let's just go to 6:15. Are you okay with that, Nanette?
Yes.
Okay, so those who want to stick around, we'll go to 6:15. So in the Q&A, what would you know about the cemetery at Manoa Theater? Many grave sites have no gravestones. How can we find out who's who?
That's a good question. And if we had more time, I could have talked about that as well, but we don't have enough time for that one. But that could be a separate lecture. Okay, so that's on the ground of where the Manoa what's the name of the Valley Theater? The theater is over there right now, but it didn't. The theater is relatively new there, and in time wise, and the cemetery has been there for a longer period of time. And when I was going there in the 1980s, it was pretty run over and overgrown a lot. There wasn't much maintenance. It's a family, and a lot of this, there's a lot of the same families are in there. It's a much smaller place, but when the theater was, the building for the theater was going on, they had to bring in a bulldozer and go in the back, and they started excavating right on the edge of the cemetery. And one day, a lady called me and said, Nanette, you got to come down to Manoa, the cemetery, because they're tearing it down. They're tearing up the cemetery. So again, I get in my car and I rush over there with my camera. And when I looked from the street, from the sidewalk, this big bulldozer, and from my vantage point, it looked like the bucket of the loader was going to scoop up parts of the graveyard. And I ran in there and I found the supervisor, and I told him who I was and everything. I said, oh, I had a report that you were going to dig up the graveyard. Is that true? And he says, no, not to worry. He showed me the plans. He said, no, we're going to go up to the line. We know where the borders of the cemetery are, and we won't touch a grave. But there are quite a few unmarked graves in there, which is typical for an older grave site, because in the older days, they would bury somebody in there. They might have put up only afforded to put up a wooden cross or a wooden plaque rather, and just kind of hand carve it or something. And those wooden ones, if nobody in the family is there to paint them or anything, if they're just wood, they'll quickly, within a few years, deteriorate, especially in a rainy valley like Manoa. So a lot of the wooden crosses have disappeared in many old cemeteries in Hawaii. And unfortunately, people have come, I don't know how many hundreds of people have called me or talked to me and said, I have this document that says my relative was buried in this cemetery, but we can't find them in there. And I have to tell them, probably because they didn't have enough money for a marker, or they only had enough money for a wooden cross, and that deteriorated, and then it disintegrated, and then they couldn't afford to put a new marker on it. And then the families move away or whatever. I've talked to, that's the hardest call I have to get, because people don't want to hear my answer, that there's no way to find that unless the cemetery has burial records somewhere. And a lot of them don't have any written records to accompany them. So that's the hardest part of my work.
That's pretty sad, but hopefully families have kept at least that story and that knowledge in them, and that it's a good note to continue to talk about our ancestors and where they are.
That's right.
Just in case, because nothing lasts forever.
That's right.
Except for stories.
Some families have got it together to says, okay, we know that person's over there. They'll put up a little monument, a more permanent marker of some kind, if they know the exact place, but most of them don't. So what do you do?
Thank you. Okay, narrowing down to some of the last questions. When did burials of Chinese in Hawaii become acceptable in general cemeteries? That is, at non-Chinese cemeteries.
So when were Chinese people buried in non-Chinese cemeteries?
Yeah, I guess when were they not needed to be segregated cemetery-wise?
Oh, okay, they came together to form, like Lenichang is just an example. There's many other groups that formed cemetery associations just for the Chinese. But as the generations go by, children move away, right? Children, grandchildren, they don't, or they lose the knowledge of where these burial sites are, or they move away and they start others putting people in other cemeteries in other places on the island or around the world, wherever they out migrate to. So then like in San Francisco, there's several just Chinese cemeteries in San Francisco Bay Area, but then there's the general cemeteries in near San Francisco that there are a lot of Chinese in, multi-ethnic cemeteries that there are a lot of Chinese in those places. And I've been to some of them when I was attended a conference in a city outside of San Francisco called Coma, California. It's called the City of the Dead because there's dozens of cemeteries in there, including in that city, including a number of Chinese cemeteries. But they use they have the red, they have they use the same cultural markings of a marker and all of that thing. So they're still doing it there and using, expressing or remembering their culture through the cemetery, even though they're in San Francisco.
Yeah, and they seem to have a very distinct, characteristics that carry their loved ones on to the afterlife. So perhaps having their own kind of space decored in their own way was preferred too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
But unless the oldest person passes it down to the younger generations, it can stop easily, and people just have known after that, generations don't know.
Sadness. All right. Well, it is 6:15 and I want to honor what we had said. So I'll just give participants or attendees, another couple minutes. If they really want their questions answered, retype in your question with your email address. I will copy and paste it and we will get it to Nanette to respond however she can. But other than that, everyone, Nanette, thank you so much for your time and your sharing your passion. And, I know not just us here is appreciative of it, but also our kupuna, our ancestors, because they want to be remembered, right? And that's the whole reason for the Lin, the Qingming.
It's my calling to the kupuna too, to preserve their legacy as well.
Oh, beautiful.
So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Kiela, and the rest of the team, the Jennies, for inviting and having me here. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. And echoing Nanette, mahalo to all of you out at home visiting us virtually. We hope to see you one day in person and at our next virtual Kahaukani conversation. So check your emails. We'll be contacting you. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Aloha, everybody. Aloha, kako. See you on Zoom again sometime.